Thanks for squeezing another Monster Monday into your schedule. It is, after all, the best way to start your week. This time around, we're delving into the wilds once more to pull a sinister cephalopod from the shadows. Give a hand, or rate, to the piercing assassin, Shu Wu. Before we begin, we're now on Patreon. You can get builds and monsters 3 weeks early there, as well as unique items and extra content. Even a little bit helps us go a long way. Following on from the new Udra, this is the second bearer of the cephalopod skeleton, as in rigging skeleton since they don't have an actual skeleton, within Monster Hunter Wilds. Unlike its fellow octopus, and other creatures bearing the two-word names, the Shu Wu isn't actually an apex predator of its or any other region. That being said, it does predominantly prey upon the guardians left behind by the ancient civilization. It does this by striking when they're weak, if not dead, squeezing its boneless body from the cracks in the ground to assault them with weapons forged from the mucus secreted across its form. It is shockingly nimble, and while its hardened mucus weapons can be a little basic at times, their variety and use alone speak to a mind that reflects the intellect of its real-life counterparts. Now, getting into more mechanical matters, its lack of recognition as an apex predator did lead to me building it below them as a 12th level creature. There's an argument to be made that preying on guardians alone should put them higher, but these guys are honestly shameless opportunists who wait to take advantage of weakened and unaware prey, cementing their epithet of piercing assassin. Despite all this, I would say that they are still animals, and they wear the trait with pride, lacking the fire trait that we saw incorporated into the new Udra. Further differentiating the Shu Wu from its conflagration-causing cousin is that they are much more agile, enough so to warrant the use of a high dexterity as its primary combat stat. This informs a good bit of its design, or at least the numbers of it. This considerable dexterity is accompanied by a moderate strength score, to help ensure that the Shu Wu can wallop at will to the woe of the warriors that it faces. As for its mental, the cleverness it demonstrates when it comes to crafting its own weapons led to a -4 intelligence rather than a -5, as well as a wisdom that sits at a low but positive value. This low wisdom does still end up being a single point higher than its constitution, as part of my overall design here is for the Shu Wu to be something of a skirmisher, which seems a little strange for an octopus. Nevertheless, I did settle on a low perception score for the Shu Wu, though, like the new Udra, it appears to lack eyes, as it is wholly immune to flash bombs. I did also land on this low value despite it being a hunter, since it is more of an ambusher that simply lies in wait for ignorant prey to wander within its range. Aiding it in those efforts is a high stealth score, which is matched by a high acrobatics score, what with both of them being dexterity based and representative of some of its tactics. Counter to those is a low athletics score. While we can see the Shu Wu dragging the hunter around in its cinematic, it doesn't make use of any grappling with any regularity in its actual fight. Lacking that, I was content with this lower value. Delving into the defenses of this dweller in the dark, I decided to start with a high armor class, based off of the high dexterity it's equipped with, as well as its own scrappiness. Seriously, this guy is always on the move. I did aim to balance this with a low pool of hit points. I'm cool with monsters that have a high AC and moderate or even high HP, especially when they have a weakness. But it also comes with having an immunity to visual effects and a resistance to physical damage, a resistance that I try to include on most higher leveled Monster Hunter creatures I make, so a low HP did feel right. With the Shu Wu lacking components, much like the new Udra, that means we only have its saving throws left, and those follow a pretty standard setup. Taking it from the top, it has a high reflex save inspired by its general agility, a moderate will save since I did make its wisdom just a teensy bit higher, and then finally a low fortitude save to match its low constitution. I think you could argue about switching around its fort and will saves, but I wanted to take the chance, as somebody who makes monsters, to do something a little different than what I usually do with these creatures. That does bring us to our octopod's offenses. Despite the many mucus-made means of mauling that the Shu Wu produces, I felt as though I could represent the most of them between two strikes. Both of these strikes use a high attack bonus and a moderate damage value, but are vastly differentiated by their traits. The melee tentacles have the agile trait since there are 6 limbs for it to swing around, finesse so that the Shuwu can attack using its dexterity, an incredible reach based on its long-reaching spear attack, and finally versatile for piercing or slashing to resemble the array of implements it can improvise by manipulating its mucus. It uses that very same mucus to create its fletchets, which it usually launches in a fan, and are equipped with a solid range as well as the thrown trait. I initially designed these with low damage, but with the reach and agile traits of its tentacles, I felt that they weren't quite alluring enough as an option. I do hope that equalizing the damage should help out that issue, as well as the few abilities it has to make use of these strikes. Unfortunately, before we can get into those, we've got to start with something both simpler and a bit more familiar. Like the new Udra and real-life octopi, the Shuwu has compression. It readily demonstrates its ability to disappear into cracks and crevices in its terrain, which I'm sure contributes to its assassin titling. Just this idea of this critter lurking in some hole of the wall waiting for some hapless fool to wander too close and then spring out in ambush. We further find another familiar face in the form of writhing arms. I included this on the new Udra as well, and like the compression ability, it originates from the giant octopus. However, unlike those two, the Shuwu doesn't get to grab any creature as part of using this, since that isn't really its bag. I do think 4 attacks for 2 actions, especially when you keep the Shuwu's reach in mind, is still pretty fantastic. Speaking of, Reactive Strike is yet another option that isn't exactly unique, but is certainly handy, and even more so because of the incredible reach that the Shuwu has. After that though, we can finally start getting into some of the unique stuff, starting with the Shuwu's hook swing. I picked up on this maneuver pretty quickly, in which the Shuwu uses its mucus to form a hook, catch a point, and then yank itself towards that target. That by itself admittedly isn't too impressive, but when doing this, I noticed that the Shuwu sometimes will bowl over hunters. As such, I ended up making that a part of this ability, with a high DC save to avoid being knocked prone. With this being a non-damaging effect, without any terribly severe penalties, you could argue for this using an extreme DC. However, I think the fact that I designed this as a single action and that the movement does not trigger reactions means that it has enough going on. It's also a great potential setup for writhing arms, or, more insidiously, its reactive strike. Though if you instead want to get your players all twisted and turned around, you could follow this up with a jet dive. As I said, I went with the skirmisher roadmap for the Shuwu because it is astonishingly mobile. Genuinely mad hops for being an octopus. Now, as if those flips and flops weren't enough for it, it will also fling out a fletchet mid-air like some back-flipping assassin. Jet Dive is meant to resemble that, and folds 2 actions into one without the flourish trait. That makes for a pretty potent ability, but I do think this is a case where the limitation of a leap, and it being an attack without the agile trait, keeps it from being overbearing. And it does have some similarities to the pounce feature found on other creatures. Taking a break from the Shuwu's mobility maneuvers, but not its ninja assassin styling, we have Smoke Bomb.
Ninja smoke bombs!
I actually almost missed the inclusion of this feature as I had it in my notes, and just straight up forgot to include it in its arsenal. Which is a bit odd to call it, since this is yet another ability that doesn't actually deal any damage. Instead, it replicates, and honestly expands, off of the effects of the Shuwu spewing out smoke to partially obscure itself. Since this smoke lingers in an area, I had it be a burst centered on the Shuwu that, like the Mist spell, causes creatures to become concealed. That is, that the Shuwu has motion sense. This will allow it to target its prey without issue despite the vision inhibiting effects of the smoke. Alternatively, it might easily cover the smoke to take a chance and escape, using the opportunity to disappear through a crack in the wall or a hole in the ground. Finishing out the Shuwu's kit is one final mobility maneuver, Maul Launch. Unlike a typical octopus, the Shuwu does not possess a beak. Instead, it has a vaguely sea star-like maw along its underbelly that is generously lined with fearsome fangs. Now, that placement means that the Shuwu doesn't get to make many strikes with this, but what it will do is flip itself upside down, and then use its powerful tentacles to propel itself across the battlefield mouth first to snatch up any tasty morsels in its way. In the abstract, this kind of resembles the trample activity. Its 3 actions that let the creature move through others, and damages them upon doing so with a high DC save. However, it is a little limited by just being the Shuwu bodily throwing itself about, which does restrict it to a straight line. As such, rather than a strike, I opted to simply equip it with unlimited use area damage. With that being an average of 27, it's seated a bit above moderate damage for its strike, with a maximum value that comes in just a tiny bit higher than high damage, and solidly suits what I'm shooting for. The unique skill for the Shuwu armor is a bit of a power-up after eating. After seeing everything it does in game, I thought that was a bit of a letdown, and I wanted to make something a bit more unique for it. The molding gloves provide an acrobatic bonus, but their main purpose is the shape weapon activation. Performed as a single action once per hour, this lets you sculpt the mucus exuded by the gloves to swiftly modify your own weapons, akin to what the Shuwu does with its tentacles. It is a brief effect, and I think an argument could be made to have it last longer, but the Shuwu's crafts are short-lived, and I kind of leaned into that. I further picked what I thought was a solid list of traits, and I hope those of you looking to use this think so as well. Armed and ready in every sense of the word, that about wraps up the Shuwu. This wily weirdo wields a wealth of weapons with which to whittle, wallop, and whack wandering warriors, with their witnessing giving way to woe and wariness. As I suspected when I built the new Udra, this was a fun one to work on. It ended up being a very different creature from its fellow cephalopod, and I might honestly prefer this one, though I would have liked to see them do a bit more with its weapon creation ability. Outside of having them simply as cave-based ambushers, that could make for an interesting way to feature an encounter with them, one of them learning how to expand its weapon options to wield against hunters. Before we wrap things up though, I want to give a quick mention. We've managed to hit 900 subscribers. We are now shooting for 1,000. If we can do so before the end of the year, I'd love to put together something a little special for the folks here. In the meantime, let me know what you think of these Shuwu and what other monsters I should make. If you dig this one, let me know with a like and a subscribe. I want to give a big thanks to the folks on the Patreon, with a special shout out to the Orc Overlords. That being Decaffeinate, Robert Miller, Shybenster, Vorthus, and the newly joined Black Ouroboros. You too could head on over there for early access to the vids and extra content. Either way, thanks for watching and have a monstrous Monday.